Hello and welcome to the CX Files for February 29th, 2024. This is probably the only episode we've ever made on a leap year Thursday. So let's go for it, Peter.
Let's go for it indeed. I'm feeling very mystical today. Leap year is always a very special time. If there's a full moon out tonight, I will tell you I'm going to hole myself up in the basement and make sure I don't come out until the 1st of March.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's see what we've got in store this week. I believe that you've got a focus on retail, haven't you?
Yeah, Mark, as you know, and as many of the listeners will know, or many of my LinkedIn followers and connections, retail and CX as it relates to retail has been a bit of a bugbear of mine. Apparently not just me either. The reality is that with very few exceptions, the retail space has really been forsaking customer experience. Now, with this in mind, we decided that we were going to bring on a retail expert. Now, we've had many people who've covered retail in the past. You know, my friend and former workmate, Patrick O'Brien, who you had on the podcast not long ago, Maya Knights, who remains a great friend for both you and I. Both of them are based in the UK. But recently I caught an interview with a gentleman by the name of Bruce Winder. Now, Bruce is based in Toronto, so he's down the road from me, as we like to say in Canada. 6 hours between friends. Yeah, you know, it's not that bad. Just hop in your car. Anyway, Bruce has become really the go-to person, I would say, not just in Canada, but in North America, to discuss where retail is sitting and where it's going. So Bruce was kind enough to afford me about half an hour. So we chatted a little bit about what some of the trends around customer experience in retail are. A few things that really stood out. Bruce has got a tremendous amount of respect for what retailers are doing, especially in the UK and the US. I believe he referred to it as the gold standard of retailing. Competition goes a long way in driving a good customer experience. One of the things that he also mentioned, unfortunately, we're dealing with in Canada, is that it's very much from a retail standpoint a race to the bottom, not just in terms of the state of retail stores, not just in terms of the abominable selection of goods that you have to purchase in a retail outlet, but also in terms of service. And the issue around service, not just when it comes to Canada, but what we're seeing more broadly around the world, Bruce and I touched on. This ranges from your in-store experience when it comes to service, all the way through to being able to get through to somebody on the telephone or using a digital channel. There's a lot of things that are disrupting the ability to provide good service in retail. We touch on them. Margins are shrinking, lack of available staff, something that we've seen a holdover from the pandemic period. But the bottom line is, this is an absolutely illuminating discussion from somebody who lives, eats, and breathes retail. And I think that everyone's going to enjoy the chat that I had with Bruce today.
Yeah, that sounds good. And it's certainly an area that's changing fast. And, you know, we've been talking about omni-channel retail for years and how the in-store experience needs to blend with the app, with the website, with the social media experience. And I don't think that there's that many brands that have really got it right yet. You know, there seems to be problems all over the industry.
Oh.
And you know, a couple of examples that I've experienced recently is walking into a store to look at a TV because I actually want to kind of see it up close and see how big it is and what the resolution looks like. But then looking at on my phone at the website of the same retailer and finding that it's much cheaper on their online store, and then showing the phone to the sales guy in the store, and then him just shaking his head as if his own website is in competition with him, you know, and this just seems nuts.
It does seem nuts. And, you know, I really have a lot of sympathy for people who do take the time to get jobs working in retail. I think it's very difficult. In many cases, it's not a situation where the retailers can't hire more people because they're not available. They just don't want to hire more people. And it's like concurrence with people working on web chat. If you're concurrently being obliged to manage 5 or 6 or 7 interactions, it's just impossible to do. And with so many people working as sales assistants or associates in retail outlets, there's just such demand from so many people coming in, looking to ask a question, looking to buy a television set in your case, maybe buy another type of piece of technology or a watch, you name it. and you can't manage so many people concurrently. I personally think that retail needs to rethink. There is a demand for retail. There is a demand for people who want to go into stores. I personally would much prefer to go into a store, try something on, see how something looks, like a TV set, how it might look in my living room, as opposed to buy it online and take my chances. But as we talk about with Bruce in the interview today, the retailers are just making it that much more difficult and that much more challenging and almost pushing people to buy online. It's just depressing. But he knows a lot more about this than I do, so I cannot wait to get to the interview so that our listeners can hear a little bit more about the state of retail and where it's going, according to one of the best minds in North America.
Okay, let's go straight to that interview.
The focus of the CX files this week is customer experience as it relates to the retail sector. And I think it's important to denote this week that we are really talking about retail. And to do so, we are joined by one of the most important experts in this domain that I've come across. He's got some amazing posts on LinkedIn, and I've seen him many times on television here in Canada. And that is the one and only Bruce Winder. Bruce, welcome to the CX Files podcast. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Peter. Wow, that was a big introduction. I'm blushing a little bit here.
Well, it's no problem. You're allowed to blush on the CX files. And
Okay.
I emphasized at the start of my introduction that we're talking about retail. We're not getting into the whole crossover into e-commerce as such. We might touch on that later on in our discussion, but I'm really interested in the dynamic about individuals walking into a store, looking around, potentially purchasing something, and leaving that facility
Okay.
from the perspective of customer experience. And, you know, I think, Bruce, as we kick off our chat today, obviously retail is the source of a lot of discussion that so many people are having right now. We've been hearing the death of retail being heralded for years. It's still around. We're hearing, I think, more concerningly, though, and more realistically, a lot of worries about the type of experience people might be having in a department store or maybe a boutique today as compared to a few years ago. And obviously, I think as human beings, we always like to focus on the negative and the controversial. There's certainly some great stories about how people have been served and what's going on in terms of the dynamic customer experience wise. But what do you, as a retail expert, as an analyst covering the retail space, how do you see the state of play for customer service within retailers at this time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is very topical right now, and I would say it's really hot and cold right now. So when you look at different retailers around the world, some folks have mastered customer service. They have it right. Folks like Nordstrom have done a really good job. They've invested in their people. But then you have other companies that maybe don't do a great job. And part of it might be their business model. They're trying to stay lean and mean from an overhead standpoint. They don't have the budget or have an allocated budget to train staff, and they're hoping that their customers are good, just kind of coming in, helping themselves, in more of a transactional approach. So it's all over the board in terms of good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, and I think that you've raised a really good point. And let's talk about that all over the world dynamic for a second, because before I hit the record button, I was mentioning to you that I've had the chance to visit the United States recently. I was also a couple of weeks ago in the United Kingdom. And one of the things that really strikes me is we're talking about a couple of different countries where I find they get that retail dynamic very, very right.
Right.
I visited a
Yep.
lot of different stores. When I was in New York, for instance, I was doing a lot of shopping down there because for the life of me, when I'm in Canada, I find that the stores are poorly stocked. You can't find anybody to help you. There seems to be a lack of willingness to go the extra mile. If you can't find the size you're looking for, whereas say when I was in Bloomingdale's in the US, they went and found one for me. When I was in John Lewis in the UK, they went and found one. In Canada, they just say go order it online.
Right.
What do you see as the global element to this? Where are the countries that you're picking up from what you're seeing where retailers are getting the CX dynamic where it needs to be? And are there any reasons why some countries just maybe aren't getting this right?
Yeah, you know what? I would echo your comments that when I think of best in class retail, I tend to think of the USA and the UK, and nothing against Canada. I love Canada. I'm a Canadian, but you're right. When you think about that, and that's why a lot of us pundits kind of travel to the UK and the US for benchmarking to get a feel for who's doing it right. There's also some really good service in certain stores in places like Hong Kong as well, and some of the global cities if you go into the luxury segment, if you're in the luxury space, luxury is pretty good across the world. Like I'm talking the Gucci's, the Pradas, they're at a certain standard, but after that it kind of falls off. And you know what? I think that there's a bit of an opportunity for places like Canada or other countries that maybe just haven't realized that consumers need or really have seen the advantage of offering superior customer experience. That's the key. I mean, for those who really don't understand it, they think, oh, it's just a cost. People are a cost, training's a cost, times are tough, let's cut costs. And it's actually the opposite. It's you invest in it and you'll get your payback back in spades. But it really depends too, I guess, on who your customers are, what kind of margins you have in your assortment, how well you're capitalized, and really your strategy, your go-to-market strategy as well.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. And I think that as we look at Canada, where both you and I are based, you're in Toronto and I'm down the road in Montreal, one of the things that we seem to have focused on from a retail perspective here, I'd say the last 15, 20 years has been that ability to reduce overheads, to reduce
Hmm.
cost, and maybe pass the savings on to the consumer. But
Hmm.
there is an actual cost in that from the standpoint of more and more people walking out of stores that we might have seen as maybe even premium brands just a few years ago and
Hmm.
having an intense frustration when it comes to the service level that you receive. Maybe there's not enough people, maybe the people aren't trained properly in terms of knowing how to follow through on an interaction, or maybe they're just
Hmm.
not that
Hmm.
friendly for whatever reason. But the bottom line is, when we're talking about an industry like retail that is so sensitive to competition, nobody can afford to get this wrong, because now we're seeing customers more willing to attrit and go to another provider than ever before.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, and Canada's, one of the things about Canada that's tough is we're sort of the land of oligopolies because we're a fairly small market and because of our competitive laws historically.
Yeah.
Big firms have sort of gobbled up other firms. So Canadian companies sometimes don't feel the competitive threat, don't feel the competitive heat that the US and the UK feel due to intense industry consolidation, right? And that kind of gets them to be a little lazy. But you're right. I mean, you know what? The whole customer experience, it starts with everything from being in stock to, having the right people hired, the right people trained, and being able to answer questions. It's attitudinal too. It's really
Yeah.
that when I think of some of the Ritz Carlton as an example, which I know isn't retail, it's hospitality, but I can't help but think how people at the Ritz are trained to make it right no matter what, and the people at the ground level are
Yeah.
paid to make it right. They don't have to say, well, I got to phone my manager or my manager's in Tuesday. Can I wait till then? They solve it right on the spot. And that's
Yeah.
why, that company attracts the clientele it does.
Well, what's their slogan? Ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly, exactly. And even that alone creates a perception and expectation, not only from customers, but of the staff too. So when they come to work every day, they know they're performing. They know that they better have their A++ game on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the customer expectations. I can tell you, since I've been working as an analyst in the CX space, one of the things that I've witnessed is consumers having an extended amount of patience and willingness to go along with potentially a frustrating or bad experience, to now we're at the point where the impatience level is bordering on rage.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
certainly I think that's being felt in all sectors, retail among them. So when you're thinking about a customer and what they're looking for in regards to a good interaction, what would constitute from a retail standpoint, whether it's in person, in store, or maybe on the telephone or using a digital channel? What are customers looking for retailers to give them? What should retailers be looking to provide a customer to ensure that ongoing level of loyalty?
Yeah. In my opinion, I think it starts with the retailer investing the time and resources to understand the customer. So by using data, responsibly, but also proactively to really understand what their customers want. So that's point one, is making that effort. And then from that, leap off from that to say, okay, based on what they want, let's give them exactly what they want. And there's some basics, table stakes like being courteous, following up, putting the customer first. There's a lot of companies that say they put the customer first, but they really don't. They put investors first. So you can see the difference between companies that really put the customer first. When you put the customer first and you work backwards, everything else will fall into play if you're a good company. Keeping commitments. If you say that something is going to happen, make sure it happens. Okay. And really listening, that's the other thing. Listening to customers, you need to ask them the right questions and listen to what they want and be able to read between the lines and be patient and really be an ambassador to your brand. But it all starts with customer data, and same with the interaction. Now, there's so much of an interaction and integration between technology and brick and mortar. You have to have a seamless integration that makes it easy and convenient and relaxing. And it's not a chore. You want customers to be able to come to your store and love it. They like going there. They like talking to the staff. They like seeing the products. The products are exactly what they want. They're in stock. The services that they require, are there. Make it easy for the customer to go down the purchase path journey, in terms of making that decision. Make it easy for them and appreciate them. Love your customers, reward your customers. If you don't reward your customers, someone else will.
Yeah, and you make a really good point there about integrating that ability to interact with a store, even if you're virtual. Like, let me give you an example. When I was in the States a few weeks ago, I ended up buying something that it turned out didn't fit me as well as I thought it would, and I needed to return it. Now, it's not the most straightforward thing when you're living in one city and you've bought something in another urban center.
For sure.
I tried contacting one of the most well-known department stores in New York. I'm not going to say which one, but the frustration I incurred, because there was a main number and then there was a telephone IVR tree where you had to try and drill down, and you kept drilling down and drilling down, drilling down.
Awful.
And then finally, once I found the department I was looking for, it rang and rang and rang, and then I got, oh, sorry, the voicemail box is full. And I went crazy.
Horrible. Yeah.
And I phoned the head office, who eventually was able to resolve my issue. And funnily enough, they had actually married up the purchase I'd made in store with their own records, and they helped me in terms of getting a return. But I mean, Bruce, it shouldn't come down to that, should it?
No, I mean, that's a classic example of companies trying to cut costs, and they feel good about it for their investors, but they absolutely treat their customers horrible. That's the other thing I forgot when I was talking about a minute ago, is when there's problems, and there's always problems in any customer relationship, there's always going to be problems. It's how you handle the problems that makes the difference between whether they come back to you or not. And when we say handle the problems, it should be easy. It should be easy. They apologize, they take it back quickly, they handle it for you. People want to speak to human beings, especially when there's a problem, because technology on paper sounds great, looks great. It's lower cost sometimes long term, but there's an alienation part. And AI isn't that smart yet. Everyone loves AI, I get it. But AI is kind of dumb right now. You need people still to have that personal interaction with customers, to make them feel valued, to make them feel loved, and have something taken care of right away.
So, Bruce, final question for you here. And I think that, it's important we're talking a little bit about technology. And I did allude to at the start of the podcast that e-commerce might be brought into the flavor of our chat today. And here's where I'm going to do it. We do know that so many consumers now are relying on e-commerce, and they're relying not just on potentially walking into a department store or storefront and walking out with something, but they like to buy online. Now, obviously, a lot of stores are offering a retail outlet, but they're also offering an online buying component, which is really important. I am of the view that these large retailers that are doing online as well haven't quite really gotten the idea that they need to be able to establish one view of the customer that might be walking into the Rideau Center in Ottawa to buy something, but also might be buying something online at a later date. In your view, is this developing this single view of the consumer, whether it's an online consumer or an in-person consumer for one specific store? Is this actually happening?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not really sure it's happening to the way that it should be happening overall. I think a lot of people talk about it. I think people realize now that it's a must-do. You have to have that seamless integration. You have to have the voice of one customer, and everything revolves around that from an omni-channel perspective. I think I'm trying to think of a company that might be really good at it. IKEA is probably as good, as any company at trying to do it, because they're very smart about the way they integrate technology with their store operations. And they're really what I would say is a best in class retailer as well. I know that Canadian Tire up here is trying to do it. They're investing a lot. They're not there yet, but they have to do it. So I think that's a good point, that there's a lot of companies that don't quite have it right yet. You still feel like you have to sort of bridge that yourself versus having the company do it for you. And I think when companies can solve that riddle, that's where the win is. That's where they can really win, because that's all customers want. They just want to have a seamless, to the customer, it's one brand, and they want to have, the brand react to however they want to be served, seamlessly, easily, friendly, fun, with no hassle. And there's still some ways to go, I think, for retailers to get that.
And for our listeners from abroad who aren't from Canada, just one quick note: Canadian Tires, they're more than just tires. And Bruce, you'll know that's a commercial from a few years ago, but I couldn't resist.
That's right.
Okay.
I worked there for 18 years, so yeah.
Well, there you go. And that there's one down the street from me here in Montreal. And I'm telling you, I'm probably there 3-4 times a week. If you're running out of something like, say, a kitchen appliance, or like I had to unblock a sink, I just walked down there. A great store, an absolutely wonderful organization. And I did say this was going to be our last question, but this will be the very final one. It goes back to a topic that you and I were speaking about before I hit the record button. I'd be curious to know, what do you see as the role of mystery shopping as a way of enhancing good customer experience in the retail space?
Yeah, I think mystery shopping is an important tool. It's one of many tools that retailers should use proactively and invest in to determine from a quantitative standpoint and qualitative standpoint how their stores are performing from a customer service standpoint. It is a great way to do it. People shouldn't be offended. If you're a store person, you shouldn't be offended, because if you're offering great service all the time, then all this is going to do is bring you to the top of the heap of, CX stores around. So I think it's a fundamental tool. I know it's controversial, but it is absolutely imperative, not unlike other tools that companies use to measure other metrics.
And I think that we know that in London, there's probably one of the most important mystery shopping examples that we talked a little bit about again before I hit the record button. And it has to do with a specific rock group that has a store in the city center. And one of the members apparently likes to put on disguises, come in and make sure that the standard of service that the team are giving all the customers from around the world is as exceptional as possible. But I won't say any more than that. Anyway. Bruce Winder from Bruce Winder Retail, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the CX Files. Hope to have you on again soon. And as we're in the midst of winter, stay warm.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.